My name is Ashley Rodriguez, and today I'm going to be talking to you about DDT. So recently, well, not recently, but over the past 50, 60 years along the coast of California, actually it's closer to 70 years, I believe. Well, once upon a time, there was a chemical that was used as an insecticide, and it was mass-produced over in Long Beach, California. Well, recently they found, well, not just recently, but back then they also found that there was a lot of fish and marine life and environmental areas, birds, all kinds of animals that were getting really sick from this chemical substance, and it was banned, no longer in use in the United States, and then suddenly the levels of DDT started, decreasing a bit, so they were able to get a stain on that. Well, recently, along the coast of California, there was a lot of sea lions that had this mysterious cancer, and nobody could explain how they were getting it or why they were getting it or what was going on. So also, like, fishermen would complain that their fish were sick or intoxicated, and nobody really knew the cause of it. So it kind of started a little bit of a mystery, and then recently a bunch of scientists went out to kind of gather some information, and they were actually just doing normal research, and they found that about 3,000 feet down off the coast of Catalina Island, there's a huge dump site for DDT, and this was done back in like the 60s and 70s, whenever the manufacturing company went under, I guess, or got closed, whatever. And they were dumping it off of the coast of Catalina Island. So this whole entire time for the last 70 years, nobody knew that this had happened. So basically they uncovered a ton of barrels of DDT that were underneath, right? And found out that it was actually making the animals and the sea lions sick, and it was causing cancer in them and causing death and all kinds of terrible things. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of background on DDT. It was actually discovered by Othmar Zeidler. Not quite sure how to say their name. Some of these words are really hard to pronounce for me anyway, so excuse my bad pronunciation, but I'm going to try. It was an insecticide that was created for malaria, typhus, and other insect-borne diseases. It was created, it's a synthetic, so it's nothing that's made in nature. It was made using chemical compounds and adding them together. And it was mainly used in the beginning anyway, it was mainly used to help protect soldiers that were in other parts or in other countries where malaria and typhus are very, they're very well known, I guess, or very abundant. That's a better word. So they found that one spray would actually keep the mosquitoes at bay for at least a week or two or even a month. It just depended on how infested the site was with these lovely little critter mosquitoes right over here, right? That's why there's a mosquito picture here. It did go from military use to civilian use. However, it wasn't recommended for civilian use. It was mainly recommended for military use because they didn't know the impact that it was going to have on the environment or the soil. So they weren't recommending it, but people, of course, got involved, and they decided that they were going to just start using it as pesticide and insecticide for in-home treatments and for agriculture. Well, pretty soon after people started using it aggressively, the U.S. Department of Agriculture got involved, and they tried to minimize the amount of DDT that was used, and that helped to, it was because they found that the benefits of it were actually not as good as they thought. they were for the insect part, but the health hazards of it outweighed kind of the benefits of it. So it had declining benefits. It had horrible environmental effects, which we'll talk more about in a little bit. And the toxicological effects of it is very toxic to both the environment and to the animals within the environment. Humans, not so much, but other more domestic animals had problems. So in 1972 was whenever the EPA got involved, which is the Environmental Protection Agency. They actually ended up banning it in the United States in 1972 and for usage, but they were allowed to manufacture it and export. So the place that did the most manufacturing actually happened to be in Torrance, California, and Long Beach, California, and along the California coast, and they manufactured to all over the world. They found that banning it did have adverse effects on environment, and that there were potential health risks for animals. They were having reproductive effects, so they were basically having it was being passed from generation to generation, pretty much. So if the mother had it in their system, the child was going to have it in theirs, and then it just kept going and going and going. And it took a long time for the DDT to actually get flushed out of the system, if it ever did. And it did also cause liver tumors and cancer in animals. So today DDT is classified as a probable carcinogen, by the U.S. and other international authorities. Whew. Sorry, I'm in the yard and things are blowing everywhere. Okay. So the chemical composition for DDT is going to be, sorry if I mispronounce this, it's diphenyl trichlorophane, I think, something like that. This is its chemical compound right here. I put the structure up of it. It has 14 carbon molecules, 9 hydrogen molecules, and 5 chloride molecules. I think it's chloride. It's known as a colorless, tasteless, and almost odorless crystal compound. That's how come it has this beautiful shape that looks kind of like a snowflake. And it is made from condensing chloral hydrate with chlorobenzene in concentrated sulfide acid. So it is something that is synthetically composed. It has 14 different chemical compounds, and there is different variations of DDT. They could be called, it's also known as DDD and DDE, but those ones I believe are not as harmful as the other two. So DDT has many forms of consumption, and it all began as a pesticide, which was something that was sprayed in the air to help prevent the insects. And when they would spray it in the air, it actually went long distances in the upper atmosphere, and it would pretty much go everywhere. It would end up in the water, it would end up on trees, it would end up in the environment, it would end up not only in the soil and all the plants that are close by, but it affected the homes of lots of animals and their young. The other way that it is very well known is people would try to put it in the earth, like they would spray it onto agriculture and to plants and crops and everything, and they discovered that it's very persistent. It's something that doesn't just go away right away. It would stay on the crops, which, I mean, is good for insecticide, but then at the same time, it would go into the earth and into the soil, and it would contaminate the soil, right? So then what happens is, because it's in the soil, the plants would take it up into their roots and the plant would then be contaminated, and then anything that would eat the plant or whatever crop it was would actually be contaminated as well. So that's how DDT actually ended up in the systems of a lot of not just plants, but little tiny microscopic organisms that were inside of the dirt, as well as the plants and the consumers of, I guess, of the crops that were eaten. So say the flower caught it, from being in the soil, and then an animal comes along and eats that eats that plant, then then that animal is going to have DDT in their system because the flower had it in its system. The other way that it was contaminated was from water, because runoff or sewage water from the factories would flush it out into the ocean. And so Long Beach in particular had a lot of DDT inside of, or in its Bay Area. They would have it in the waters close to shore, and then all the animals that lived in there got, and fed on those organisms, particular plankton and stuff like that. They would get it in their system, and then the bigger fish or whales or whatever would take up or eat the plankton, and then they would end up with DDT in their system, right? So it's just all about consumption and the different environments that it ended up in. And because DDT was an aerosol kind of product, it ended up everywhere, right? So it affected all sorts of life. So effects of DDT. It is something that's typically found on fatty cells. So when DDT enters the system through consumption, obviously, it goes straight to like the adipose tissue or the fatty tissues in our body. And it's often found in the lungs, liver, and the adrenal glands that are along the brain, because if you know a little bit about the human body, you know that the liver is a more, I don't want to say a more fatty tissue, but it kind of is. And it's it's what breaks, I don't know if that's the right word. Anyway, it has to do with the breakdown, right? Along with the brain, they also found that there were sections of the brain that were also affected by DDT. It induces microsomal enzymes through activation of constitutive androgen receptor, and affects mitosis by producing multiple daughter cells instead of only two. Okay, so think about mitosis as whenever the cell splits, right, and it creates another cell, right? Not necessarily another living organism, but it creates another cell, right? And so whenever mitosis happens and it has DDT in it, it's actually making extra of the, oh my gosh, I don't want to say, it's not chromosomes. It's actually making extra bases. That's what I was thinking. Whenever it's doing its DNA replication. So it ends up mass producing extra cells, which is what causes cancer. So a lot of these lovely little critters over here, like this lovely seal, right? They are all affected by this cancer that just suddenly sprang up inside of them, because whenever they intook the fish that had DDT, it went into their cell system, and they ended up, mass producing cells, which is what caused cancer. I hope that made sense. Conclusion. So I put this quote up because I thought it was a very good idea. Disposing of waste where you don't see and forget about it does not solve the problem. The problem eventually comes back to haunt us. So what they found was the reason why all these animals were affected by or having this mysterious cancer. Same thing with the rockfish and the white, oh my gosh, the white cloaker, there you go, which are bottom dwellers, is because they actually found that there were a bunch of these barrels. This was a recent find in 2021 in, I want to say like April or May last year. They found that there was a ton of barrels that were actually thrown out as they put it, acid sludge, out into the Pacific Ocean right by Catalina Island. And now they have discovered over 500,000 barrels that are down there. And unfortunately, because they've been down there for so long, the barrels are starting to decompose and they're starting to leak all this DDT. So it's kind of just sitting there on the bottom, and all of the bottom dweller animals, you know, again, the white cloaker and the rockfish and other bottom dwelling animals, they are consuming it, and those of course are feeding the seals, and the seals are coming back and they end up having large amount of cancer, and that is what's causing cancer. And a lot of fishermen will tell you that there's been this theory amongst fishermen that DDT there's a waste site out there, but nobody could ever confirm it. And then recently a scientist found it, and it was 3,000 feet down. And they found it because they were doing some sonar, something, trying to figure out what was going on with the fish. So that being said, they're still in the process of trying to figure out how they can possibly counteract what's going on. Nobody quite knows exactly how they're going to do it yet. It is something that's still a work in progress. But I just wanted to put this, just because you don't see it doesn't mean that, and forget about it doesn't mean that it solves the problem, that it's eventually going to come back to haunt you, right? So that's exactly what happened in this case, and now we have to figure out what we're going to do. Anyway, I hope you guys found this slideshow presentation entertaining in some way, shape, or form. I thought it was very interesting to learn about, especially because I live in Long Beach. So it's good for me to know about the community where I hope to get involved in eventually. All right, guys, have a wonderful day and happy Mother's Day. And here are my references. Woohoo. Oh, here. I don't know how to do it. There. Oh, no. You guys get it. There's my references. Have a great day.